Hey everybody, my name is Jeff and thank you for coming by and watching this video at the Fowler Project. This is actually the first video of this channel, so an extra big thank you for those of y'all that are here watching because it means that you are supporting this from the very beginning, and I am very grateful. So bear with me as I kind of get the hang of this whole booktube thing. I thought a good video for the first one on this channel would be kind of a review and catch up of what my reading has looked like in 2020 so far. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys about some of the books that I've read and kind of give them a kind of a mini review, small rating, just kind of give a taste of what kind of stuff I look for when I read and when I review. And then moving forward, my plan on this channel is to have more individual videos reviewing books. But for this first batch, first one that we're going to talk about is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is a really nice, almost fairy tale-esque kind of story that has a lot of strong roots in Russian and Slavic folklore. It's a very atmospheric book. If you are somebody that loves to read purely for setting and to be transported to a different world, this is a great book for that. Arden's descriptions of the Russian countryside and its winter season really just kind of makes you want to bundle up on the couch as you're reading this with a nice hot cup of cocoa. She's got great characters. The main protagonist, Vasya, is this kind of her coming of age story. She is a young girl that's growing up in kind of a small Russian village. The thing that makes her special is that in this small village, she can see some of these traditional Russian spirits or demons that nobody else can see and that a lot of people have actually started to kind of stop believing in. Turns out these spirits kind of get a lot of their strength from belief, so Vasya is kind of the one that is keeping them around and keeping them going. The plot in this story was not my favorite. It's probably the weakest link in this book. It tended to kind of drag on, and not actually really drag on, it just took a while to get started. It's about 350 pages, and for about the first 250, you get told over and over again that there's this guy that's going to come and he's going to kick things off, and then we'll really get this story rolling. And then he kind of starts to appear, and then he says, nope, I'll be back in a little bit. And then he kind of keep going and going, and they start to build him up even more, and then he decides that he's going to push back his arrival even further. And that kind of cycle repeats itself a lot up until like the last, 75 pages or so. And then the last 75 pages are really cool, but personally I just kind of wanted more of that throughout the entire book. So overall, The Bear and the Nightingale, I would say, is an 8 out of 10 for me. Setting, amazing. Characters, really strong. Plot, kind of and that's where it lost points for me. The next book that I want to talk about, or really series, is the Paternus series by Dyrk Ashton. This is a self-published trilogy. I read the first 2 books in February, and the 3rd book was released in July, and I just started reading that one a couple weeks ago. This is an urban fantasy that is based around lots of world mythology and folk tales and myths and legends. Ashton does a wonderful job of weaving all of these different cultures together and spinning out his own kind of world building story using all of these characters that we already know. The characters are really strong. You've got your kind of standard fare from Greek mythology and Norse and Egyptian, but he also does a phenomenal job of using characters from biblical stories, from Arthurian lore, from various different cultures and regions in Asia, South America, and Africa. And then he can also kind of build his own mythos, connecting all of them. And we start to find out that what we thought we knew about these characters is not exactly true, and that some of the stories didn't get told the way they were supposed to. The main protagonist in this book is Fiona. She is a 17-year-old that is kind of slowly figuring out that she's not the normal girl that she thought she was, and her eyes are starting to open up to this grander world that's in front of her. She was a character that I didn't quite like at first, really kind of grew on me though as the story went on. But the strength in this book is definitely the side characters and all the gods and heroes that you get to meet along the way. Now, there are some cons to this that I feel like I do need to mention. It's something that might turn off a good amount of people from this, but others can kind of get over and still enjoy this story. The first is the writing style. It's written in present tense, which is not a very common writing style, especially in fantasy. So it can be a little bit jarring, especially if you're somebody like me that likes to keep 2 or 3 books going at once, and you're kind of hopping back and forth, kind of making that brain switch in between different tenses. It can be a little bit jarring every time you pick up the book, but overall I didn't find it to be that bad, and you get used to it pretty quickly. There is a ton of action, which is awesome, but in all of these action fights, Ashton likes to do a lot of head hopping, where you're kind of following one person and then the story will, without even a pause, jump to somebody else in the same scene and kind of follow what they're doing, and then switch back and forth and then go to somebody else. So you do kind of got to get used to that. But when you do get used to all the head hopping, it does a great job of letting the story play out similar to a high stakes, almost Avengers-like action movie. And you get some really cool fight scenes, some really cool battle scenes that are all being told at this breakneck pace where you're trying to keep up with 5 people at once. And you get a really, really cool effect from that. Overall, the best recommendation that I would give this to is somebody that is looking for kind of a more mature, more adult version of the Percy Jackson books. If you have a passing interest in mythology or like to learn about other cultures' mythologies, this is a fantastic book to dive into. Third up on the list is the Ryria Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. This, I think, is my favorite series that I've read so far this year. It is set in your kind of classical high fantasy world with humans and goblins and wizards, but it follows 2 thieves that have what I think is the greatest bromance in all of fantasy, that could only be rivaled by maybe Locke and John from The Lies of Locke Lamora. In fact, they've got a very similar relationship to Locke and John. The 2 characters are Royce, who is kind of your sneaky assassin type thief, very loose moral codes, has no problem slicing some throats to get the job done, and is just a star-studded assassin thief. The other character is Hadrian. Hadrian is a strong mercenary that carries 3 swords, and he carries 3 swords because he knows how to use them well. He has a very strong moral compass, and it very much only wants to do the right thing. He's kind of a Robin Hood-esque thief, steal from the rich, give to the poor, only do what is just and fair outside of the law. And these 2 characters do a really great job of balance each other out, and they kind of get into some good banter arguments along the way. What makes this series really unique is the fact that Michael J. Sullivan wrote the entire thing all together before it was published. He actually didn't even intend to publish it when he started writing it, and then was convinced by his wife that he really needed to share this story. So first he self-published it, and he self-published it as 6 books that were later recollected and traditionally published as a trilogy. So either way, how you pick them up doesn't really matter. It might be a trilogy or it might be 6 books. But because the fact that he wrote it all together means that the story is super tightly knit. There are no wasted scenes. There are no wasted characters. Even somebody that you think is only going to stick around for a couple pages, they're probably going to come back and impact the story in a big way later on. So if you like that kind of tightly knit story, then this is definitely a fantastic one for you. The whole plot starts out with these 2 thieves being hired to break into a castle and steal a sword. And in the midst of doing that, their plans totally fall apart. They get caught, they're locked up, and the adventure is only starting from there. I'm not going to tell you any more because I really want you to read this story, and it's a great one, and I really want to save all the twists and turns for you to discover yourself. next book is Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is another very fast-paced book, has a lot of action scenes, some of the most badass sword fights that I've read in a fantasy novel in a really, really long time. One of the cool things about this is that it takes place on a African-inspired fantasy world where Winter's crafted this really cool Omehi culture, which is a people that are trying to colonize a new land. Something happened to the land that they came from. We're really not entirely sure what, but whatever it is, it's bad enough that they ran away from it with dragons, and now they're going to use these dragons to try to kind of conquer this new world. Our story picks up a few hundred years down the road where the Omehi have broken up into a kind of a class culture. We've got the graders, which are faster, better, stronger, and the lessers, which are, well, less than that. Our main protagonist is Tao. He is a lesser that has had some pretty bad injustices done to him from the ruling class, and he is just out for revenge to become kind of this killing machine so that he can seek retribution against those that have slighted him. Winter does a great job of kind of dealing with themes of anger and rage, the cycle of violence. Is revenge worth it? Are the bad people really the bad people? Lots of those kind of things dealt with in this book. The other big strength that Winter brings to this book is his combat writing. Like I said earlier, this has some of the coolest sword fights that I've read. Winter does a great job of really bringing the reader up close into some kind of gladiator style fights. A lot of the fighting is training. A lot of this book takes place in a military school, so you can kind of get some Ender's Game vibes, a little bit of Hunger Games, that kind of stuff in this. If you're fans of those, I think you'll really like this one too. Overall, this book was a 10 out of 10 for me. Probably the only 10 out of 10 that I've read this year so far. Alright, I'm going to wrap this video up with the Poppy War Trilogy. I read the first 2 books of this just a few weeks ago. Book 3 is slated to come out in November, and I cannot wait. This is a 9 out of 10 series for me so far, and depending on how things wrap up in book 3, I think it's got a lot of potential to end on a good note. The setting in this series is a Chinese-inspired fantasy world. The plot and the characters take a lot from actual 20th century Chinese military history. R.F. Kuang set out to really bring some attention to the fact how in fantasy war gets kind of glorified and idealized a lot. So in her books, this is a really, really brutal picture of what war is. A lot of the atrocities and evil that happens in this book are taken straight out of actual Chinese historical events. Events like the Rape of Nanjing, the Second Sino-Japanese War. There's a lot of stuff that's inspired by Unit 731 too. So it is important to note to anybody that's going to read this that it gets dark, and it does get pretty gory, especially. Now, if you've got a really weak stomach, you can kind of skip around a lot of that if you just want to skip over chapter 21. But I really, really recommend, if you can stomach it, to read through it, because it's very eye-opening to some of the historical atrocities that before reading this I really didn't know much about. I think one of the great things about this series is the way that it's kind of brought some attention to those kind of events. Overall, the world building is great. The magic system's really cool. It's all built around using heroin to reach the gods and use their powers. There's a lot of elemental magic in this, fire, water, some wind, spirit, stuff like that. This is really fun to explore and utilize in a really unique way that I haven't seen before. Overall, the Poppy War, I think we get a 9 out of 10 for me. Dragon Republic, 9 to somewhere to 9.5, and we're still waiting on Burning God to see where this whole trilogy sticks its landing. Thanks for sticking around, and like I said, this is the first video on the channel, so I'm hoping that you guys liked it enough to at least see me improve a little bit by video 2, hopefully. Peace.